A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When the Magi had departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Rise, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you. Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him. Joseph rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt. He stayed there until the death of Herod, that what the Lord had said through the prophet might be fulfilled. Out of Egypt I have called my son. When Herod had died, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, Rise, take the child and his mother, and go back to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. He rose, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go back there. And because he had been warned in a dream, he departed for the region of Galilee. He went and dwelt in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled, He shall be called a Nazarene. The Gospel of the Lord. As most of you know, this afternoon, our own Cincinnati Bengals will wrap up the regular season at Paul Brown Stadium, and they'll be facing the defending Super Bowl champion Baltimore Ravens. And I'm sure most of you will be rooting for the Bengals and hoping that Andy Dalton has a good day. But if you look the first time the Ravens offense takes the field and Joe Flacco gets ready to take his first snap, and you look over the offensive line of the Ravens, whose job it is to protect that quarterback, you'll see at the position of right tackle a man named Michael Orr. And this is the same Michael Orr whose job of protecting the quarterback became the theme of a book written back in 2006 that was adapted into a motion picture. And both the film and the book were given the title The Blind Side. Now, as the motion picture so vividly illustrates, the journey of Michael Orr's life, the journey that eventually led to the Super Bowl, was not an easy one. He was born in Memphis in 1986, and he was one of 12 children of his mother, and she was addicted to alcohol and to crack cocaine. And Michael's father was a drifter who spent a lot of his life in prison, and so while he was growing up, Michael drifted around a lot himself. He lived in one foster home after another, and at times he was homeless. And he attended 12 different schools when he was growing up. But he got a break in high school because almost by accident he was enrolled in a private school. It was Briarcrest Christian School. And while he was there, he became known by the nickname Big Mike because he was 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed more than 300 pounds. And he came to the attention of a couple whose own 2 children were attending school there at the same time. And their names are Sean and Leanne Toohey. And in the film, you see that one night they were out, and they saw Big Mike on the street, and he was out in the rain and the cold, and he didn't seem to have proper clothing on, and he didn't look like he had anywhere particular to go. And so they insisted that he get into their car, and so they took him home with them. And when they got home, their daughter was sitting on the sofa, and she had put on some sort of facial moisturizer. And she looked up, and she saw her parents coming in the door, and Big Mike coming in with them. And all that face cream couldn't hide the astonishment on her face. To say the least, she hadn't expected to see Big Mike coming in the door. Well, he ended up spending the night, and the next day he didn't have anywhere to go, so he spent that night too, and the following night, and on and on. And pretty soon, the Tooheys began to realize how much he needed the shelter that they could provide. the shelter from the cold and the wind and the rain, but especially the shelter from the isolation that he'd known his whole life. And then they saw something else. When they together provided that shelter for him, not only did they change his life, but they changed themselves. Before, like a lot of families, each member had their own individual interest and they went off. But when they had to come together to provide the needs of Michael, I think they recognized how much they needed each other. And as it turns out, at times they needed Michael as well. At times they needed protection from injury or even being insulted, and Michael, who was the size he was, could fit the bill. And so when they felt threatened, he would reassure them, "Don't worry, I got your back." And time went on, week after week, and they kept asking Michael, "What do you need?" And finally he said, "Look, I'm almost 18 years old, and I don't drive. I would like a driver's license." And as it turned out, the only way they could get him a driver's license would be if they became his legal guardians. And so, one evening, Sean Toohey looked at Michael and he said, "Michael, we would like to take out papers to become your legal guardians." And Michael was puzzled and said, "What does that mean?" And Leanne explained, "Michael, it means that we would like for you to become a member of our family." And Michael paused, and finally he replied, "I kind of thought I already was." So without being told, he had sensed that he'd become a part of the family, that unit that he had longed for his whole life. And he was also becoming a very good football player. And when he got set to finish high school, a number of colleges and universities wanted him to go there so that he could play football for them. Now, the Tooheys were very partial to the University of Mississippi because Sean and Leanne were both alumni of that school, and they were big supporters of Ole Miss. But when Michael finally chose to go to Ole Miss, the NCAA became very suspicious. They thought that the Tooheys had done all this not for the sake of Michael, but for the sake of the university so they could have this very good football player. And so they sent an investigator who interviewed Michael, and Michael told her, "Look, nobody made me go to that school, to Ole Miss. I chose to go there. I really want to go to that school, and I never wanted to go anywhere else. And it is because that's where my family went to school." Now, in the gospel we heard last Sunday, the fourth Sunday of Advent, we heard of the angel coming to Joseph in a dream and saying, "Look, Joseph, your plans are to divorce Mary, but the plan that I am giving you is the plan from God, and that is for you to take her and the child that she is carrying into your home and into your family." And Joseph did as the angel had instructed. And this week, again, in our gospel, to celebrate this feast of the Holy Family, we again hear the angel coming to Joseph in a dream, and this time saying, "Herod wants to destroy that child, the Christ child. You must flee with him." And so, again, Joseph did as the angel had instructed. He fled with the child and his mother and went to Egypt. And then when the threat from Herod had passed, he returned. But to protect the child, he didn't return to Judea where Herod's son was the tetrarch. Instead, he returned to Galilee, to the town of Nazareth, and there he and Mary raised the child. And so our gospel tells us that Christ, the one sent to protect all of us from the power of darkness, himself came into this world as a helpless, vulnerable child, and for his mission and for his very life, he needed the protection, the shelter, and the love of a human family. And by answering those needs, Joseph changed the history of salvation. And at the same time, he changed himself from the carpenter of Nazareth to Saint Joseph, the patron saint of fathers. And so from today's gospel, we get this image that by providing the needs of those in our families, those to whom we are the closest, by directing them to their fulfillment, at the same time we direct ourselves to our perfection. And while all families are called to this image, today let us think back a week to the gospel that we heard last Sunday, how the first family came to be. It wasn't because Joseph had planned the whole thing out. It was because he followed the mission that he was given in the middle of the night, a mission he never expected. And so perhaps on this day, we should keep a special place in our thoughts and our prayers and our exhortations for those families like the Tuohys, and even like my own family, who have gotten family members that they didn't expect. And for those souls like Michael, who yearn for families who aren't expecting them. And we should always tell ourselves that regardless of how they came into the world, and regardless of how they came to be with us, when we look into the eyes of those who have come into our families, or we hear their voice, and we know and we see the different ways that they need us, each time, each day, they can remind us of today's gospel and today's feast. And regardless of whether they came as newborn babies or as 300-pound Super Bowl champions in the making, when we respond, when we shelter them from the cruelty of this angry old world, and we protect them from the snares of the devil, and we love and we welcome them as once we were welcomed and loved into our own families, then the spirit of today's gospel will come into the sanctuary of our families. And that spirit that once led Jesus, Mary, and Joseph on the journey we hear of today, that same spirit will lead our families and each of us to our eternal destiny.